more blunt with our requests that this whole thing stop. So we were having tea at Mrs. Kane's house and decided that we would just simply walk into one of these dens of iniquity. Imagine the courage it took for us women to walk into a place like that and demand that the place be shut down immediately. So the next day, now Mrs. Kane is gifted at playing the hand organ. And so we went down to one of the saloons and we stood in front and she played her hand organ and sang all of the verses of that wonderful song, The Prodigal Son. And when she got through, we just simply went in the door, said to the owner, shut this place down right now. This is illegal. This is a bad place. Well, he just grabbed me and yanked me outside and plopped me outside. And somebody had informed the town marshal that there was a big problem and 200 people had gathered outside the saloon. And so he took me out there and threw me right at the feet of the town marshal. Well, you see, there were 200 witnesses there, and the saloon was illegal. The marshal had taken a vow to uphold the law. What could he do but close that saloon? Oh, Mrs. Kane and I were just ecstatic with triumph that we had closed the saloon. And so we went to her house and began to talk about what we could do the next day to another saloon. So we couldn't think of anything and wandered around the house and went out to her barn, and I picked up a couple of bricks that I saw lying inside the door of the barn and wrapped them in newspaper and put them sort of behind my skirts and my coat, and went to another saloon and did the same thing and went in, and I was on fire with anger at this place, and I took those bricks and I threw them and broke the mirror over the bar with both of those bricks. Oh, the sound of breaking glass was music to my ears. and so the same thing happened again. We were thrown out, and by this time, WCTU members had gathered along with us there and were shouting and calling out and really raising a ruckus, and there were newspapermen coming and taking notes about all this that was going on. And I thought, well, now that's a good idea. More people will know what we're doing here because the newspaper people can fix that all up. So then we went back to Mrs. Kane's house, and I began to feel very, very regretful that I had only been able to carry 2 bricks. So we wandered around the barn some more, trying to think of what to do. And my eyes fell upon this. My friends, this is an extension of the arm of the Lord. So we began to go to the other saloons. By this time, they knew we were coming, and they would lock the door. And I recognized how important it was to have many witnesses to what was going on. And I thought it would be good if they saw something very, very interesting. So I would go to the door, and this is what I did every day from then on. I went to the door, and I put my hand on the handle. And I shook it as hard as I could, you see, because the shaking just added to the drama of the day. And I would shout, "Open the door, you rummy, this is God's work." And of course he would not open the door, so I just took my hands around and chopped the door down. And everything, and so we poured in there, and WCT members kept pouring in with us. And I said, this is much better. You see, I made sure that I got the whole mirror this time. I went to the mirror first and chopped it. With a hatchet chopped it down. Then next were the bottles under the shelves and on the floor. And then after that, sometimes the furniture. He'd grab a table and chop the legs off of it. And the people who had been in there drinking were quite frightened at the sight of the hatchet, so they all ran outside. But we were having a wonderful time. And I couldn't help but laugh so much of the time when I was chopping. Oh, this is so wonderful that we're doing this and chopping down these saloons. Well, by this time, there were more people out in front with the marshal, and I got taken to jail. Well, now, I was not afraid of that. There was not a problem for me, because some years before, I had been made the chaplain of the jail from the Women's Christian Temperance Unit. So I was used to going into the jailhouse, and one of the things I could do while I was there was something extra. Here were lawyers leaning against the hallway walls, smoking their cigars. cigars in their cigarettes, and I think smoking is a terrible, terrible thing. Not quite as bad as drinking, but it's terrible. So when they take me down the hall to the cell I was to go in, I just snatched the cigarettes. I told me I was going to clean up this whole town and drinking and smoking, going like that. Well, of course, as I said, I was used to people laughing at me. But we got so much attention. See, such a wonderful thing to happen. Now, newspapermen are my best friends. When they write an article about what we have done and the saloon that we have chopped down, and they put it in the paper, and then the paper goes all over the world. I smash in one place, and they smash all over the world. And I began getting letters from every other state in this union. I began getting letters from England and Ireland and in Europe, where people would come and clean up their town. Especially letters from mothers and families and people who were suffering so much from this terrible scourge in our country that's happening today. And so sometimes people would send money, so then I was able to buy a train ticket to go to different towns. People put me up in their homes and had me speak in meetings such as this. And so I traveled, I met many, many wonderful people. And sometimes I would get into serious difficulty and wonder if God really, really wanted me to do this, what I was doing. And because one time I went to the saloon owned by Mr. Schilling and did my usual chopping down the door and breaking everything in the saloon. And one of my favorite things, by the way, when I got through breaking all the furniture was to look at the bar in the saloon and start at one end and make big wedges in the bar. Down a few more feet, a big wedge in the bar and another big wedge like this, ruining that place that the saloon keeper was so proud of in his bar, where people seem to have some kind of a good time, although I've never been able to understand it. And when I was almost through, he said, "My wife is going to get you for this." And I thought he was going to strike me, but I suppose he did not have enough courage to strike a woman. And so I decided that since the crowd was so big and so enthusiastic about what we were doing, that I announced that I was going to come back the next day. And I was going to preach in front of the doorway, now broken of course, at the saloon. So somebody brought me a box, and the next day I went and was standing up on the box preaching about the evils of alcohol, the evils of the demon rum, the terrible things that were happening to our fathers and our sons and our uncles and our grandfathers. And I assumed that it was Mrs. Schilling, and I think probably she had seen a number of barroom brawls in her day. She knew just what to do. She came up with her fist and hit me twice in the face and blackened one eye and cut open a cheek on the other one. And everyone was so excited at this, and I realized the importance of the crowd and their response. So I asked people if they would just simply calm down, and I would leave for a minute, and then I would come right back. So I went across the street to a butcher shop, and I got a piece of meat and some twine, and I tied the meat like this around my head, and then, to help with the black eye. And but the trouble was, it was a little bit long, and it kept flapping against my cheek while I was preaching. But such a wonderful piece was written in the newspaper the next day. It was worth it. In another place, I was doing the same kind of preaching, and the saloon keeper had paid money to a group of, I hesitate to say it, women of the night to come up and attack me. And so I was beaten by this group of 5 or 6 women and landed in a ditch that was muddy. And at that moment I was lying there in the mud. I said, "God, are you sure that you really want me to do this?" But again, as I read the papers, I was positive that I was getting that kind of affirmation. Now, I know that sometimes life makes you different kinds of changes. And Mr. Nation decided, all of a sudden, out of the blue one day, that he wanted to become a minister. And I was so startled and so amazed, but I was pleased because I had been a very, very firm, strong Christian and a member of the church. And so I encouraged him to do that. So he found a church in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, and went down there. Oh, but he wasn't very good at it. There was no fire in his sermons. No, and I would get so embarrassed and uncomfortable with it. So finally I said to him, I'm going to write your sermons from now on. I'm sure they'll be a lot better. And so I did. I started to write his sermons for him. And so all he had to do was read what I had written for him. And so that happened. But then, even when he was reading this wonderful sermon, he still wasn't showing any enthusiasm for it. And so once in a while, I just couldn't stand it. I would say, speak a little louder, Mr. Nation. Speak a little bit louder. We can't hear you. And then sometimes, gesture in this spot here, something like that. Well, people were upset with me for that, but I just wanted him to do better. And one time it was so terrible that I don't know what happened in my head. Something just snapped. And we'd taken his hat off for his work in the church, and I always kept it in the pew beside me. And so I said, I can't stand this anymore. So I picked up the hat, and I got up and marched down the aisle, went up and slammed the Bible shut and handed him his hat and said, that's enough, Mr. Nation. Several days later, the church asked him to leave the post there as the pastor of the church, and of course I understood perfectly because he just wasn't doing very well. Sometime after that, I received another terrible, terrible blow to my life. Even though I had been with Mr. Nation for 24 years, and he had taken care of us financially, the marriage was not a happy one. And finally, I suspect that he had been taunted by other men in the community about not being able to control his wife as much as she needed to be controlled. He said, I am going to get a divorce. Imagine a good Christian woman having her husband file for a divorce. So it was a humiliating experience for me, but that he used. But then I did have a house, and I was free to move about and go on all these travels and these speeches that I have been asked to go on, even going across the Atlantic Ocean to England. The English people are and uncles and grandfathers. And so I know that that's why God wants me to keep doing this. In fact, people now call me your loving home defender, and when they write to me, they say, Dear Carrie Nation, you are our loving home defender. And I will keep doing that as long as I live. You see, I know that this is what God wants me to do. I'm just a bulldog sitting at the feet of Jesus Christ, barking and biting what he don't like. That's what I am, and that's why I lecture and preach the way that I do. Now, I have heard that in this town, there is still one saloon, illegal, still operating. It is time for us in the WCTU to go down and close that saloon. Who is willing to be a sacrifice unto the Lord? Follow me. Smash, smash.